Androgyny. It dates back hundreds of years. The term androgyny as a noun came into use back in 1850, but ultimately derived from ancient Greek. But what does androgyny mean, you ask? By Wikipedia definition, androgyny is the combination of both masculine and feminine characteristics. Gender ambiguity may be found in fashion, gender identity, sexual identity, or sexual lifestyle. But what does that mean? Throughout most of the 20th century Western history, social rules have restricted people's dress code according to gender. Trousers were traditionally worn by men as a male form of dress, frowned upon for women. However, during the 1800s, female spies were introduced, who would wear their uniform with a dress over trousers. Women activists during this time would also wear trousers. Activists such as Luisa Capetillo, who was the first woman in Puerto Rico to wear trousers in public. In the 1900s, starting around World War I, traditional gender roles blurred, and fashion pioneers such as Coco Chanel introduced trousers to women's fashion. The flapper style for women of this era included trousers and a chick bob, which gave women an androgynous look. Coco Chanel, who had a love for wearing trousers herself, created trouser designs for women such as beach pajamas and horse riding attire. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the women's liberation movement, sexual liberation, and the Stonewall riots that were happening at the time were believed to have contributed to how fashion was changing, and influenced fashion designers such as YSL, who designed the Lee Smoking suit, first introduced in 1966. Helmut Newtons took androgynous photos of it, making Lee Smoking iconic and classic. The Lee Smoking tuxedo was a controversial statement of femininity and has since revolutionized trousers. Elvis Presley, however, is considered to be the one who introduced the androgynous style in rock and roll, and made it the standard template for rock and roll frontmen since the 1950s. His pretty face and use of eye makeup often made people think he was a rather effeminate guy, but Presley was considered the prototype for the looks of rock and roll. The upsurge of androgynous dressing for men really began during the 1960s and 70s, when the Rolling Stones played London's Hyde Park in 1969. Mick Jagger wore a white man's dress designed by British fashion designer Mr. Fish. Mr. Fish, also known as Michael Fish, was the most fashionable shirt designer in London, the inventor of the kipper tie, and a principal tastemaker of the peacock revolution in men's fashion. His creation, Mick Jagger, was considered to be the epitome of the swinging 60s, and from then on, the androgynous style was being adopted by celebrities all around. During the 1970s, Jimi Hendrix was known to wear high heels and blouses quite often, and David Bowie presented his alter ego, Ziggy Stardust, a character that was a symbol of sexual ambiguity when he launched the album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars. This was when androgyny really entered the mainstream and became a big influence in pop culture. Another significant influence during this period included John Travolta, one of the androgynous male heroes of the disco era in the 1970s, who starred in Grease and Saturday Night Fever. Continuing into the 1980s, the rise of avant-garde fashion designers challenged the social constructs around gender. They reinvigorated androgyny in fashion, addressing gender issues. This was also reflected within pop culture icons during the 80s, such as David Bowie. Also during the 1980s, Grace Jones, a famous singer and fashion model, gender-thwarted appearance which startled the public, but her androgynous style of power dressing and eccentric personality has inspired many. This was seen as controversial at the time, but from then on, there was a rise of unisex designers later in the 1990s, and the androgynous style was widely adopted by people all around. Androgyny has been gaining more prominence in popular culture in the early 21st century. Both fashion industries and pop cultures have accepted and even popularized the androgynous look, with several current celebrities being hailed as creative trendsetters. The rise of the metrosexual in the first decade of the 2000s has been described as a related phenomenon associated with this trend. Traditional gender stereotypes have been challenged and reset in recent years, dating back to the hippie movement and flower power. Artists in films such as Leonardo DiCaprio sported the skinny look in the 1990s, a departure from traditional masculinity which resulted in a fad known as Leomania. This trend came along after musical superstars such as David Bowie, Boy George, Prince, Pete Burns and Annie Lennox challenged the norms in the 70s and had elaborate cross-gender wardrobes by the 80s. Musical stars such as Marilyn Manson and the band Placebo have used clothing and makeup to create an androgynous culture throughout the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s. While the 1990s unrolled and fashion developed an affinity for unisex clothing, there was a rise of designers that favoured that look, like Helmut Lang, Giorgio Armani and Pierre Cardin. The trends in fashion hit the public mainstream in the 2000s that featured men sporting different hairstyles, including longer hair, hair dyes and highlights. Men in catalogues started wearing jewellery, makeup, visual kei and designer stubble. These styles have become a significant mainstream trend of the 21st century, both in the Western world and in Asia. Japanese and Korean cultures have featured the androgynous look as a positive attribute in society, as depicted in both K-pop and J-pop, in anime and manga, as well as the fashion industry. In 2016, Louis Vuitton revealed that Jaden Smith would star in their women's wear campaign. Because of events like this, gender fluidity in fashion is being vigorously discussed in the media, with the concept being articulated by Lady Gaga, Ruby Rose, and in Tom Hooper's film, The Danish Girl. Jaden Smith and other young individuals such as Lily Rose Depp have inspired the movement with the appeal for clothes to be non-gender specific, and have since pushed androgynous dressing to new heights. So what is androgyny in today's society? Androgyny ties in very closely with the LGBT community, with a goal set to deconstruct the limitations around gender identity and gender roles. Androgyny could be perceived as the media's way of sticking two fingers up to the general masses and removing the boundaries society has built up over so many years that dictate what each representing gender role is permitted to demonstrate and showcase publicly, effectively blurring the line between male and female roles and helping to push the ideology of equal rights for both men and women. Examples of androgyny within modern TV and film industry include films such as Resident Evil, where the main protagonist, Mila Jokovich, represents a female character featuring a more masculine persona. This androgynous style defies the norms of female characters in film and TV, with a shorter hairstyle and more masculine characteristics, all demonstrated by a female star. These traits contribute to the blurring line between male and female roles, muddying the stereotypical idea that men are masculine and women are feminine. Another example of androgyny may include TV series such as RuPaul's Drag Race. This is a slight crossover into the drag world, as androgyny is not necessarily drag, but the messages they carry are one and the same. Drag in its day was aimed at sticking two fingers up to the male community, where men would dress up in an exaggerated form of female attire to entertain and to protest. The aim of this again was to blur the lines between the male and female roles, push the movement of LGBT rights, and deconstruct the boundaries set in place by the general public. Androgyny is everywhere. On your TV, on your radio, your line manager Carol, or your pizza delivery guy. Your music, your TV, your social lives, your work, it is all inclusive of androgynous people. Androgyny is change. It is not something to be feared, it is something to be embraced. Androgyny is removing the shackles of gender restraints set up by years of oppression and having the ability to express yourself freely without the fear of ridicule or isolation. Androgyny is strength to go beyond the norm and create a new norm in its place. Androgyny is the future. Androgyny is now. So what did we learn from today? In this video we have covered a brief history of androgyny, and from this we have concluded that androgyny and androgynous dressing are the expression of our own character through our own choice of visual representation, regardless of the social restraints of gender stereotyping. It is defying the boundaries of gender limitations where only men can wear trousers and only women can wear makeup, defying the boundaries set in place by society and its expectations regarding gender roles. Androgyny has the ability to remove the divides between men and women and ultimately can create a more diverse and equally accepting world for ourselves and our children to flourish in our own individuality without boundaries. Androgyny is the future. Androgyny is now.